We have David van Wyk back on the line as we continue our conversation with regards to accountability in the mining sector over safety irregularities following the inquest findings of the Lily Mine tragedy. David, thank you so much for your patience and your time this morning as we pick up from where we left off. At this point, it's clear that executives at Lily Mine were aware that that particular area that was being mined was not safe. Where accountability is concerned, it gives credence to the calls that you yourself, along with other analysts, have been making for a number of years.
Yes, indeed. And so, as I was saying, the Department of Mineral Resources is very irresponsible in issuing mining licenses in mines that are essentially defunct. They should be closed and rehabilitated instead of having new licenses issued, especially a mine like Lily Mine, which is on several fault lines, but it's also a mine which is more than 100 years old. There was very little gold left. The gold that is left was in the pillars that hold up the mine, the chambers underground. And the central pillar basically collapsed as a result of it being stripped. Now, we don't know if it really was stripped by illegal miners or whether it was stripped by the mine itself, because its license conditionality said that it is allowed to strip the pillars. I know of several licenses that have been issued on the West Rand, for example, to allow for pillar stripping of old underground mines. And this poses a very serious danger to the public because it can lead to an underground collapse of these pillars, and then it could lead to very serious sinkholes and the surface collapsing in on the mine. We have seen some surface collapses as a result of Zama activities on the East Rand, for example, in the Springs area, and that's those sorts of places as well. So I don't understand how formal mines can have ghost workers underground when they've got massive security at those mines. The court also found that the police are accountable because they did not ensure the safety of people living in the area and also of people to be immune from having illegal miners. But one of the other areas which is very concerning is subcontracting and labor broking, because the mines no longer employ their employees directly. So very often people who are underground shift bosses and so on don't know which people are supposed to be there and which people are not supposed to be there. So it's very easy to insert ghost workers underground if you come through subcontractors and labor brokers. As happened seemingly in the Northwest Province 2 years ago when those 21 Zama bodies were found next to the road.
That's a grave concern because essentially what you are describing is a situation where mining companies, labor brokers as well as DMRE are then in a position to say, this does not fall on our doorstep, given the dynamics of where the gaping holes are with regards to who's hired at what particular mine at what given time.
Well, exactly. And I think that, we've got three spheres of government: local, provincial, and national government. But mining is a national competency. And so the national competency always overrules and overrides local concerns. And, it speaks to the process of environmental impact assessments, environmental management plans, and mine management plans. The compliance officer at this Lily mine actually committed suicide 1 or 2 years after the disaster. And you ask yourself, why did the compliance manager commit suicide? No one has actually satisfactorily explained that particular situation. And that is probably because the mine was not compliant. But besides that, I think that local government should pay more attention to what is happening, because it is responsible for the residents of a big area, let's say, for example, Johannesburg, or let's say the East Rand or the Far West Rand and so on. There are millions of people living on top of old mines, and if people are stripping the pillars underground, it poses a really, really serious danger.
And a major concern, David, as we wrap up, is the issue of those licenses that are being granted. it brings in a concern of where the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy can essentially say they do not govern the issuing of those licenses once they are out there. And should there be a collapse of sorts, it is then not in their hands to tackle. A tricky balance with regards to why are these licenses then being offered and issued to mines that are essentially not within the structural purpose of mining itself at its core value.
Well, I think that we've been pointing out that some of these mining licenses are actually scams. They are mining pension funds and so on. They're not actually producing gold. Central Rand Gold, for example, never produced an ounce of gold, but they took millions and millions of rands from shareholders, from bank loans, from pension funds and so on, never to produce any gold and then to go bankrupt. The same thing with Coal of Africa in Limpopo, the same thing with Mintails on the far west rand and so on. There are many of these licenses that have been issued that are not viable licenses at all, and what we suspect is being mined are pension funds and so on rather than actual minerals. But at the same time, they create huge environmental threats and dangers, and we really need to pay far more attention to the issue of mining licenses, the processes of consultation, the engagement of the public, and also the deployment of experts on behalf of the public to see to it that public health and safety is actually sustained.
Lastly, now that the inquiry findings of the Lily mine tragedy are out and it points to accountability being laid at the footsteps of the state itself as well as the mining company, how do you respond to how direct accountability needs to be? Who lays those charges that would be maybe prosecuted within the criminal law element of South Africa?
Well, I think that the lawyer representing the families of those workers who sadly passed away in that particular accident will now go after the DMRE, the police and the mine management. But the problem is that very often the outcome of these cases is a slap on the wrist for mining companies. You know, very often it doesn't really take into consideration the extent of the damage caused. If we look at Jagersfontein, for example, the DMRE immediately walked away from its responsibility by saying it's a water affairs issue, when it's not really a water affairs issue and huge damage was caused and so on. And it took 7 years, 7 years to get to this point. Justice delayed is justice denied. Now, I don't know how long it's going to take for the lawyers to be able to make the case against the state, against management, against the DMRE and the police in this particular instance. But, when there's such a big disaster such as the one at this particular mine, we really need to act much faster. The day after the accident happened, I already appeared on the media and I also wrote some articles and so on in which I said the central pillar collapsed. It took them 7 years to come to the same conclusion that I came to. I just looked at the map of that mine and I looked at its mining license and so on, and I realized this is what happened. And so 7 years, why did it have to take so long to get to this particular point, to come to a ruling that, the government, the police and the DMRE are responsible? We really need to act much faster because we need to show far more concern for public health and safety and for the citizens of this country rather than just for profits.
Thank you so much for your time and insights. That's David van Wyk of the Benchmarks Foundation talking to us about mining irregularities in the light of the findings of the Lily mine tragedy inquest.